Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and this is the next in the series of the Louie Gohmert articles, because he wrote this paper back in April of 2018 because he was very upset that people were calling Robert Mueller this really shining, stellar guy who, would surely be honest and forthright and everything. And so Louie wrote this to let people know what he knew about Mueller, and that Mueller is not an upstanding man. And so we've seen all the different times that Mueller has targeted people and he's taken them down, and then all of a sudden they were exonerated. New evidence came up in the court, and suddenly there was no case against them, and the decisions on the cases had to be vacated. So it was just a series of targeting people that were public enemies or somebody that he needed as a fall guy. In the last video, we talked about the Muslim Brotherhood connection and care, and how it seemed like Mueller was cozying up to those people, and that Louie Gohmert pointed out how they had these outreaches to CARE and to the Muslims, but not to other religious groups. And, as individual groups, they had as a community whole, but not specific outreaches to those particular groups. So that's going to come into play a little bit here, because this is really kind of a continuation on from the last one. And this one is very disturbing, especially with the situation we're in, where you never know what's going to happen, and especially when it comes to having terrorists around. Now, I'm not going to deal with the events that happened today. This is Saturday that I'm recording this, so I'm not going to deal with that, but I suspect that there's more to the story than we're being told, and that some of the things that are coming out are not exactly the facts that will end up coming out in the long run. So I'm just going to say that. My heart goes out to those who lost their lives at the Walmart. So let's just say that's all I'm going to say on it, okay? There are some rules with YouTube that I'm not allowed to say much more and to actually say what my opinions are. But anyway, I may deal with that in a blog post on my website this week, so I'll let you know if I do. Anyway, this particular section is called Purging the FBI Training Materials. And as always, all the links will be down below, and you're welcome to speed me up if you want to listen faster than I speak, okay? We repeatedly see cases where people are radicalized, came on the FBI radar, but the federal agents were looking for Islamophobes, not the terrorists standing in front of them. This is because Mueller's demand of his FBI agents in the new age to which he brought them was to look for Islamophobes. If a Mueller-trained FBI agent got a complaint about a potential radical Islamist who may pose a threat, the agent must immediately recognize that the one complaining is most likely an Islamophobe. That means the agent should first investigate whether the complainant is guilty of a hate crime. Okay, now I'm going to remind you, this was written by Representative Louie Gohmert of Texas. Okay, this is not someone who is a conspiracy theorist. This is not somebody who hangs out on 8chan or anything like that. This is a man who has been through all of these different hearings, and he has seen classified documents that you and I haven't seen, and he knows what he's talking about. So please understand, and if you are a YouTube person who is reviewing this video, understand that this is not any kind of conspiracy theory, because this is Louie Gohmert saying this. So just had to say that. Anyway, let's go on. Too often it was after an attack occurred that Mueller-trained FBI agents would decide that there really was a radical Islamic threat to the United States. The blinding of our FBI agents to the domestic threat of radical Islam is part of the beguiling damage Robert Mueller did as FBI director. That is also the kind of damage that got Americans killed, even though Mueller may have avoided offending the radical Islamists who were killing Americans. As terrorism expert Patrick Poole continually points out in his Known Wolf series, the overwhelming majority of terrorist attacks on U.S. soil are committed by those the FBI has interviewed and dismissed as a threat. So, before I get into this part, I want to show you the articles that he's talking about there, about the Known Wolf. This is one of them, and this was written by Patrick Poole, September 29, 2016. So it's been out for a while. But this is what he said: Known Wolf terror scandal. Of the 14 attacks under Obama, FBI already knew attackers at least 12 times. And if you think also to Parkland, you remember that the FBI was alerted ahead of time. I mean, there have been several times when the FBI was alerted before something happened, but they didn't take action. And then something bad happened. So it's just something to remember. And if you look at this, this goes through a hearing where Rand Paul kind of targeted Comey about it. And, he was talking about during a Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing on Tuesday, Comey said that the FBI is reviewing the missed opportunities in both the recent New York and New Jersey bombing and the mass killing in Orlando in June. However, as seen in the exchange below between Comey and Senator Paul, the FBI director seemed unconcerned about the problem. But he really should be, because missed chances by the FBI might be America's only terror problem. Virtually every Islamic terror attack under President Obama's watch was committed by a known wolf suspect. 4 such incidents already this year, a dozen incidents during the Obama administration, and virtually no other attacks at all. And then here's the exchange. I will play the clip for you, and you can hear, really, James Comey, just his defense is, your facts are wrong, even though Rand Paul had his facts nailed down. So here's the clip.
A little harder. The most recent guy was in jail, and they said, well, we didn't investigate him, he was in jail. Well, we never even prosecuted him, which is a whole nother criminal justice issue. You don't get prosecuted for stabbing your brother. But the thing is if he had a lawyer at the time, you should have at least requested. Maybe the lawyer says you can't talk to my suspect, but someone should have asked. He gets out of jail after 3 months. He's never prosecuted. Nobody ever follows up. I think there's a lot of public information you could have looked at. I think there's no reason why you couldn't open an investigation. And the standards get much lower when the investigations are open. The standard for the FISA warrant isn't probable cause. It's relevant to an investigation. And we can argue about that standard, but that's the current standard. I just don't think we're necessarily using our tools adequately. And I think it is important to admit when we make mistakes so we can improve our technique. And I guess my question to Director Comey is it your position that no mistakes were made in each of these in judging them not to be credible threats? Would you not have done more in the gun store that Mateen came into 6 weeks before the shooting? Would you not have done more when Rahami was arrested to question him because his dad said he was a terrorist?
Thank you, Senator. Sitting before you is a deeply flawed and fallible human being who believes very strongly in admitting mistakes when they're made. I hope you saw the very painful moment when I admitted publicly we made a mistake in allowing Dylan Roof to get a gun. So as long as I'm director of the FBI, we will stare back very carefully at what we do, and where we make mistakes, we will admit them, we will be transparent, and we will get better. As you know, I hope I commissioned a look back at our investigation of the Orlando killer, which is just being completed now, and the Inspector General is going to do another one, which is great, because if there's learning there, we're going to squeeze it for all the learning we can and get better.
But what's your opinion on the gun store? Should we have done more?
Your facts are wrong there.
Excuse me?
Your facts are wrong there. The gun owner did not call us contemporaneously. When we were contacted and went back to the store, it was the weeks afterwards. And so the video was not available. Your facts are also wrong with respect to what the bomber in New York, who's still alive and is going to have a trial, I hope, and be sentenced to jail for the rest of his life. So I want to be careful what I say. Your facts are wrong about what his father told the FBI. But there as well, we will go back and scrub our prior contact with that matter very, very carefully, and maybe the Inspector General will as well, which would be great as well. And if there's learning, we will learn from it. We are not perfect people. We aspire to be perfect because we think that's what the American people have a right to expect. But you will find us being very candid about our shortcomings and our strengths.
With regard to length of investigations and your internal policy on having probable cause to open investigations.
Yeah, that's just wrong as well. We don't need we need probable cause to get a search warrant or to get a wiretap. And I want to correct something else you said. You need probable cause to get a FISA warrant from a FISA judge. To open our investigations, the threshold is much, much lower. We open assessments based on just tips. Then we open preliminary investigations and full investigations on much, much lower thresholds because you investigate to see if there is probable cause.
So should we keep our investigations open longer?
We should keep them open as long as the facts warrant keeping them open. And there is no restriction. As you saw in Orlando, that preliminary is normally set for 6 months, can be extended another 6 and another 6 and another 6. We have the policies and the tools, by and large, that we need to do this well, which is why we need to look back at each case and say, so what did we do? Who did we interview? What documents did we get? And how could we do this better?
But that would be the judgment call. Should we keep them open longer?
Sure, and that judgment has to be made every day by professional agents with the review of their supervisors.
Senator McCaskill.
So you could see from Rand Paul's face that he wasn't buying what Comey was selling. Not at all. Anyway, it goes on down here, and it just says sometimes they hadn't even been placed on terror watch lists. And so this was a really interesting article here that was talking about how, oftentimes the FBI was already aware of who these people were. Pool cites at least 8 other such known wolves, including the underwear bomber, the Fort Hood shooter, and perps in the Orlando nightclub massacre and Boston Marathon bombing, as well as jihadis in Garland, Texas, Little Rock, Arkansas, Seattle, West Orange, New Jersey, and Columbus, Ohio. In fact, there have been a dozen. So there were several of them. And, this is the one article. And then if you want to go on and read this other article, this one was by Andrew McCarthy. And it was actually written 8 days before that last one. And so, deadliest lie. Without lone wolf lie, U.S. could have stopped nearly every attack. Something very important that we need to be aware of. And when you go through and you look at these, it's kind of scary. Now, he gives a list down here, and I'm not going to go through it, but where's the list? It is in here somewhere. But both of these are excellent articles. This one, he's talking about these 3 basic things. Washington is so bloated and dysfunctional, it will leap on any excuse to refrain from strong action. The American tradition of religious liberty can be exploited to paralyze our government if national defense against a totalitarian political ideology can be framed as hostility and persecution against an entire religious faith. And because Washington has so much difficulty taking action, it welcomes claims, or to be faddish, narratives that minimize the scope and depth of the threat. Topping the narrative list is the fantasy that the Islamic ideology support system that nurtures jihadism, in other words, like the Muslim Brotherhood and its tentacles, which we talked about in the last video, is better seen as a moderate, nonviolent partner with whom we can work than as what it actually is, the enemy's most effective agent, the stealth operative that exploits the atmosphere of intimidation created by the jihadists. So, this just amazing here when it goes through. And I think this one, let me check real quick here. No, it wasn't that one. It was the first one. It has like 4 different parts. So, after you read a few of them, you get they all start to blend together. Okay, this one has 4 pages, and it goes through on the next page, and it will start listing some of them. So it goes into detail. I'm not going to go through that part, but, you can read this. The link will be down below, and you can see what it has to say. But in all of these cases he lists here, the FBI knew about the problem ahead of time and never did anything to stop it. So that's something that I want to impress on you, that when some of these things happen, the FBI is really who's supposed to be stopping a lot of these kind of terrorist activities, no matter who's doing them. And if they're still happening, why isn't the FBI catching these people? Okay, before something happens. So you do have to ask yourself that question. Now, I understand people are flawed and sometimes, you just can't catch everybody. But, it just seems to me like the FBI's been kind of not on the job lately. So I wanted to share that with you and let you know about those. Now, going back to this, we have here, Louie's talking about 3 of the more high-profile cases. And, of course, here is the link to the first article I showed you. In Orlando, the mass killer who attacked the Pulse nightclub in June 2016, Omar Mateen, and I'm going to screw up these names, so just forgive me, okay? Had been interviewed by the FBI on 3 separate occasions. The open preliminary investigation in 2013 lasted 10 months after Mateen had told others about mutual acquaintances he shared with the Boston bombers and had made extremist statements. He was investigated again in 2014 for his contacts with the suicide bomber who attended the same mosque. At one point, Mateen was placed on 2 separate terrorism databases. He was later removed from them. Northwest Airlines, Abdul, we're going to call him Abdul, boarded Detroit-bound Northwest Flight 253 on Christmas Day 2009 with 289 other passengers wearing an underwear bomb intended to murder them all. He was well known to U.S. intelligence officials before he boarded. Only 1 month before the attempted bombing, Abdul's father had actually gone to the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria and met with 2 CIA officers. He directly told the CIA that he was concerned about his son's extremism, and they didn't do anything. Abdul's name was added to the Terrorist Identities Data Mart Environment database, and that's evidently tied. However, his name was not added to the FBI's terrorist screening database, or even the no-fly list, so he boarded a plane. When asked about the near takedown of the flight and these missteps, then Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano remarkably told CNN that the system worked. Okay, then, to me, if it would have worked, he wouldn't have gotten on the plane. The only system that worked in this incident, a culture that values bravery, already instilled in the passengers who acted. And then Boston, prior to the bombing of the Boston Marathon by Tamerlan and Sarnav, I don't know. The worst fear you have when you're reading things like this is having names that are just like, I'm going to mess up these names. So in April 2013, that killed 3 people and injured 264 others, and the FBI had been tipped off twice. Russian intelligence warned that Tamerlan was a follower of radical Islam. Initially, the FBI denied ever meeting with Tamerlan. They later claimed that they followed up on the lead, couldn't find anything in their databases linking him to terrorism, and quickly closed the case. After the second Russian warning, Tamerlan's file was flagged by federal authorities demanding mandatory detention if he ever attempted to leave or re-enter the United States. But Sarnav's name was misspelled when it was entered into the database. An internal FBI report of the handling of the Sarnav case, unsurprisingly, saw the FBI exonerate itself. The FBI doesn't do a very good job of, checking itself and trying to find the problems within itself, contrary to what James Comey seems to think they did. When I asked at yet another House Judiciary Committee oversight hearing in the wake of the Boston Marathon bombing, Mueller himself admitted in response to my questioning that the FBI had indeed gone to the Boston mosque the bombers attended. Of course, the FBI did not go to investigate the Sarnavs. The bombers' mosque, the Islamic Society of Boston, was incorporated by known and convicted terrorists. The incorporation papers were signed by none other than Abdurrahman al-Mahmoudi, who is currently serving 23 years in federal prison for funding terrorism. One of the members of the Board of Trustees included a leader of the International Muslim Brotherhood. Yusuf, whatever, who is barred from entering the United States due to his terrorist ties. Did Mueller's FBI go to the Boston Bombers Mosque to investigate the Tsarnaevs? This is from the House Judiciary Oversight Hearing transcript. Now, he gives the link to the PDF transcript, but, you know, and you can certainly read that, but it is 119 pages long. And so I went to C-SPAN and I found it, okay? And I'll tell you what, I'm getting pretty good with this because I noticed what page it was on. It's like page 100, I think. Yeah, page 100 of 119. And so I got this video and I tried to do the search down here because you can usually search. It came up empty. I mean, it just came up blank. There was nothing there. So I couldn't find it exactly. So I said, oh, well, it should be about right here. And honestly, I clicked just a few seconds before Louie Gohmert starts, which happened to be that Johnson guy from Georgia who was the one that thought Guam might tip over. And so, but he actually had a good question. He was like, so how come, you know, all this stuff about what databases and everything and how much information you're collecting from people, how come that's classified? Why don't you at least give us just statistics, you know, so that people understand what's being collected from them? I thought that was actually a very good question. And so anyway, this Louie does quote this here, but there's a little bit before it that I'm going to play so you can hear the whole thing. And then I'll stop when he gives more comments down here. So here we go.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director. I'm not going to comment about your being last time here. I did that a few years ago and didn't turn out right. But anyway, I want to follow up on what my friend Mr. Johnson was talking about, the overclassification issue, because it does seem to be a problem and certainly an issue. There's an article today entitled Obama's Snooping Excludes Mosque Missed Boston Bombers. I wasn't aware of and I went to the FBI website. I wasn't aware of the Sensitive Operations Review Committee, so I wanted to find out what it was. Well, apparently, if something involves things like news media, religious or domestic political organization, things like that, then it has to go before the Sensitive Operations Review Committee in order to be approved. And here's the information on the data about if it's a political organization like a Tea Party or religious organization like evangelical Christians, which the Department of Homeland Security is so afraid of, or mosque, apparently it has to get approval here. And we already knew, and we have gone through with, and it seemed ridiculous to me and Michelle Bachmann and Lynn Westmoreland that the material we were reviewing that was purged by subject matter experts was classified. It would seem that if you're trying to make the Islamists feel better about training materials, you'd want them to see what they were removed. And I'm just curious, why are the subject matter experts that the FBI had go through all their training material and purge anything that might be offensive to an Islamist? Why was that needed to be classified? I would think they'd be heroes in the Islamic world for getting that stuff out. Why was that classified?
Well, we went through a thorough review. I think you've been fully briefed on it. In those materials are examples of cases.
I need you to. I have such a short time. I need you to answer questions. And my question is, why were the subject matter experts' identity classified?
Because the process in whole had within its parameters all information that we have in the Bureau. And if I'm not mistaken, we gave you the names of the individuals.
In a classified setting, and so I'd get prosecuted if I revealed them. And I don't know why you can't make those public so that people would know. But obviously, you feel
I will look at that and
well, and also I want to go back to Boston. You said things like, and I jotted these down. What you said, the FBI did an excellent job, did a thorough job. Don't know what else we could have done. And according to the Russians, there's a great deal more that could have been done. And when we find out about this this Sensitive Operations Review Committee, and as this article points out, if it's true, it says that we don't know who the chairman and members are of this Sensitive Operations Review Committee, who the staff, that's kept secret. The FBI never canvassed Boston mosques until 4 days after the April 15th attacks. If the Russians tell you that someone has been radicalized and you go check and see the mosques that they went to, then you get the articles of incorporation, as I have, for the group that created the Boston mosque where these Tsarnaevs attended, and you find out the name Al-Amoudi, which you'll remember because while you were FBI director, this man who was so helpful to the Clinton administration with so many big things, he gets arrested at Dulles Airport by the FBI, and he's now doing over 20 years for supporting terrorism. This is the guy that started the mosque where your Tsarnaevs were attending, and you didn't even bother to go check about the mosque. And then when you have the pictures, why did no one go to the mosque and say, who are these guys? They may attend here. Why was that not done since such a thorough job was done?
Your facts are not altogether well.
All right, point out specifically.
May I finish my
point out specifically. Sir, if you're going to call me a liar, you need to point out specifically where any facts are wrong.
We went to the mosque prior to Boston.
Prior to Boston.
Prior to Boston happening, we were in that mosque talking to the imam several months beforehand as part of our outreach efforts.
Were you aware?
So if you watched the last video, you remember me talking about the outreach efforts to the Muslim community. And that's what Mueller said in this one. He talked about the outreach efforts. You know, it was just a way for them to talk about how they're trying to get along well with these Muslims. Well, now, okay, I'm going to say, and Louie will say it later on, I do not believe that all Muslims are terrorists, okay? I don't believe that at all. And I'm not saying that. But some Muslims are, and usually we call that radical Islamism. So I just want to point that out because what is happening is they pretend like they're reaching out to all Muslims, but they're really reaching out to a small community that are connected to known terrorists. And that was the issue. This is what Louie Gohmert was trying to point out to people. Anyway, he says, outreach efforts? Yes, that is apparently Mueller's efforts to play figurative patty cake with the leaders and tell them how wonderful they are and how crazy all those Islamophobes out there are. But they surely got assurance that Mueller's FBI is after those bigots. Maybe they sat around on the floor and had a really nice meal together. One thing for certain, they weren't asking about the Tsarnaevs, but the hearing got even worse. And here's that one.
Outreach efforts.
Were you aware that those mosques were started by Al-Amoudi?
I've answered the question, sir.
You didn't answer the question. Were you aware they were started by Al-Amoudi? You were not. Okay. Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes.
Then my time for questioning expired, leaving many questions unanswered. Why was the FBI unaware of the origins of the mosque attended by the Boston bombers? I think Louie had a really easy time going to find that out. Why couldn't the FBI do that? And why didn't they? This was arguably the most traumatic Islamic terrorist attack in America since 9/11 because the explosions happened on live television at the Boston Marathon. When did the FBI become an outreach to terrorism organization to the detriment and disregard of its investigations? Under Director Robert Mueller's tenure, that's when. In Director Mueller's efforts to appease and please the named co-conspirators of terrorism, he was keenly attuned to their complaints that the FBI training materials on radical Islam said some things about Islamic terrorists that offended some Muslims. Never mind that the main offense was done to the American people by radical Islamists who wanted to kill Americans and destroy our way of life. Mueller wanted to make these co-conspirators feel good toward Mueller and to let them know he was pleased to appease. Director Mueller had all of the training materials regarding radical Islam purged of anything that might offend radical Islamic terrorists. So, in addition to using his 5-year up or out, and we talked about that in a previous video, policy to force out so many experienced FBI agents who had been properly trained to identify radical Islamic terrorists, now Mueller was going even further. He was ensuring that new FBI agents would not know what to look for when assessing potentially radicalized individuals. When some of us in Congress learned of the Mueller-mandated purge of FBI training materials, and I tend to think that was probably after 2008 that he did that, starting in 2009, we demanded to see what was being removed. By the way, that particular clip that I showed of Louie Gohmert talking to him, that was in 2013. So Mueller was no longer in the FBI at the time, and so he was not the director at the time. Unfortunately, Mueller was well experienced in covering his tracks, so naturally the pages of training materials that were purged were ordered to be classified, so most people would never get to see them. This technique right here of having something classified, if it's classified, then it's like putting a gag in their mouth, because they cannot talk about it then to like their constituents or to us. This is what happened to Devin Nunes when he saw the classified documents that we're waiting to see that are going to be declassified. He saw them, they outraged him so much, he came right out, he did a press conference, and he was livid about it, but he couldn't say anything because it was classified. And see, this is the trick they've been using. They classify stuff, and in essence, they gag these people. And that allows the press to make up all kinds of stories they want to make up when these congressmen who have seen the factual evidence can't talk about what they saw, but they know it's not true. But they can't say, well, it's not true because of here's your evidence. They can't show the evidence because it's classified. How convenient. And that's why Devin Nunes and a few others have been just demanding these documents be declassified, because they know that when people see these, they'll understand this is all their support for the arguments they've been making. And they're not making things up. They have evidence to support what they're saying. The problem is it's classified, so nobody can see it. How convenient, huh? Well, anyway, this is a tactic that I think Mueller has used many, many times. After many terrorist attacks, we would hear that the FBI had the Islamic terrorists on their radar, but failed to identify them, as we saw in those articles. Now you are beginning to see why FBI agents could not spot them. They were looking more at the complainant than they were at the radical Islamist, because that is what Mueller had them trained to do. So if somebody comes in and they say, hey, this is what's happening, this person is likely going to do something bad, then they would look at that person instead, the person complaining, and say, so this sounds like hate speech. I don't think you should be saying that. You know, this is wrong. When political correctness stops our law enforcement agencies from being able to do their job, we're in trouble. We're in big trouble. Anyway, Michelle Bachmann and I were extremely upset that Americans were being killed because of the terribly flawed training. We demanded to see the material that was purged from the training of FBI agents regarding radical Islam. That is when we were told it could not be sent over for review because the purged material was classified. We were authorized to review classified material, so we demanded to see it anyway. We were willing to go over to the FBI office or the DOJ, but we wanted to review the material. We were told they would bring it over and let us review it in the Rayburn building, which is where their committees meet, in a protected setting, I think. It could be where their offices are. I can't remember, but yeah. And in a protected setting, I assume meant like in a SCIF, which is a place they can go to read classified documents and not have anybody be able to watch what they're doing and, you know, to be able to leak it in any way. And they can't take their phones in or take notes or anything like that, I don't think. They finally agreed to produce the material. Members of Congress, Michelle Bachmann, Lynn Westmoreland, and I went to the little room to review the vast amount of material. Lynn was not able to stay as long as Michelle and I did, but we started pouring through the notebooks of materials. It was classified, so naturally I am not allowed to disclose any specifics. But we were surprised at the amount of material that was purged from training our agents. Some of the items that were strictly for illustration or accentuation were removed. A few were silly, but some should clearly have been left in if an FBI agent was going to know how and what a radical Islamic terrorist thinks, and what milestone had been reached in the radicalization process. It was clear to Michelle and me as we went through the purged materials that some of the material really did need to be taught to our FBI agents. For those densely headed or radical activists who will wrongly proclaim that I am writing as an Islamophobic complaint, please note that I have never said that all Muslims are terrorists. I have never said that because all Muslims are not terrorists. But for the minority who are, we have to actually learn exactly what they study and learn how they think. As Patton made clear after defeating Rommel's tanks in World War II, he studied his enemy. Sounds like Sun Tzu, right? What he believed and how he thought. In the movie Patton, he loudly proclaims, "Rommel, you magnificent beep. I read your book." That is how an enemy is defeated. You study what they believe, how they think, what they know. Failure to do so is precisely why so many known wolves are able to attack us. And again, that's a reference back to those 2 articles I showed you. Clearly, Mueller weakened our ability to recognize a true radical Islamic terrorist. As one of my friends in our U.S. intelligence said, we have blinded ourselves of the ability to see our enemy. You cannot defeat an enemy you cannot define. Robert Mueller deserves a significant amount of the credit for the inability of our federal agents to define our enemy. Purging the advanced counterterrorism agents' training materials. FBI Special Agent Kim Jensen had spent a great deal of his adult life studying radical Islam. He is personally responsible for some extraordinary undercover work that remains classified to this day. He was tasked with putting together a program to train our more experienced FBI agents to locate and identify radicalized Muslims on the threshold of violence. Jensen had done this well before Mueller began to cozy up with and pandered to groups such as CARE. Complaints by similar groups caused Mueller to once again demand that our agents could not be properly instructed on radical Islam. Accordingly, Jensen's approximately 700 pages of advanced training material on radical Islam were eliminated from FBI training, and all copies were ordered destroyed. When Director Mueller decides he wants our federal agents to be blind and ignorant of radical Islam, they are indeed going to be blind and ignorant. Fortunately, in changing times well after Mueller's departure as FBI director, a new request went out to Mr. Jensen to recreate that work because at least someone in the FBI needed to know what traits to look for in a terrorist. It still did not undo the years of damage from Mueller's commanded ignorance of radical Islam. So that's where I'm going to end it on this one. There's just so much in these 2 articles that I gave you. I really think you need to take the time and read them. Like I said, this one has 4 different pages to it, but it's mostly listing the problems with them and how the FBI didn't know about these things ahead of time and could have stopped the problems, but they didn't. So I'll leave the links to all of them below, and you can go through and see what they have to say. And again, this whole term, they say that they were lone wolves, but they're not, because they always found connections with them. And, if you were with me with the last one where I showed you that document about the settlement plan for the Muslim Brotherhood, you'll understand what I'm saying here, that they usually are not lone wolves, that they're known wolves. They know who they are, they know about them, they just haven't done anything about them. So that's what I've got for you on this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.